guys, back again. This is the one where I'm going to go over my spicy take for what I believe is going on in Final Fantasy XIV. But for now, the first thing I'm going to say is I just think that the jobs need to be far less homogenous. I know that they've been going in that direction, but I feel like there's basically little to no job identity anymore. And I have to agree with the part of the raiding community that wants more agency in fights. What do I mean by giving the groups more agency? Largely things like boss placement actually mattering. I heard back in Stormblood, and somewhat in Shadowbringers, that you could move the boss around a lot, and you would actually need to plan to have the boss somewhere, instead of the boss just teleporting to the center like they seem to do in all of the Endwalker raids, and what seems to be going on in the Dawn Trail raids so far. I would go so far to say that right now, I don't believe that positional should be a thing, but that's only because of the direction that they've been going in the last expansion or two. I would actually prefer that they start going backwards rather than in the direction that they're going in, because I do not believe that they're going in a beneficial direction. Things like having stance dancing come back for optimal damage on tanks would be cool. I understand that there's some consideration towards balancing for those groups who would attempt to optimize the hell out of their tank damage, and those who would be more casual, but let's be frank. The damage a group gets week 1 by stance dancing isn't going to equal the kind of damage a casual group will gain over the next 6 to 8 weeks by re-clearing the early fights and getting tomes. So I don't believe that this is much of an issue. Your groups who don't optimize in that way aren't going to clear week 1. They aren't even attempting to. They weren't trying to. They likely wouldn't have, even if they put in all of the hours. But now they're missing out on some damage because their DPS don't use the tools to transfer threats, so that the tank can take tank stance off and deal as much damage as they possibly could. I'm personally coming from having played tank in WoW during Wrath of the Lich King, because there was actual threat management at that time, needing to know how to generate the threat and how to hold aggro on either single or multi-target groups, depending on the composition of your party. Since I started Final Fantasy XIV during Shadowbringers, threat has literally never been a factor as a tank, aside from keeping enemies from attacking co-tanks if they leave stance on. So much so that tanks can almost just hold threat on enemies by auto-attacking while the DPS deal optimal damage to stuff. It just seems like the dumbing down of a mechanic that didn't need dumbing down, to a degree so ridiculous that the people playing tank don't actually need to worry about it in the slightest, so long as they keep tank stance on. You could even test this by going into something like the Deep Dungeon, and just, when your tank gets silenced because they run into a room on their own, they can just auto-attack whatever's in front of them, while all of the players who are playing DPS actually cast spells. You'll probably pull off of the tank eventually, but 1 or 2 auto-attacks at the beginning is enough to hold threat for quite a while. And by the way, Square, why does my tank stance drop whenever I enter a duty? Or whenever I sync to a fate? Sure, I've adapted, and I remember to turn it on whenever I go into a Duty Finder dungeon where I'm level synced, but it's an ability that's so low level that I can't enter a duty without it being available, so just leave it on when I get level synced. Unless I get level synced into something so low that stance doesn't exist, but why would I be doing 5th level fates? I don't know, it's about the only time it's appropriate to take my stance away from me, but I just don't understand why that's a thing. And continuing on to what I believe is going to be my spicy take, I hear a lot of things against this from content creators in the community, and I don't understand why. I think we just need to go back to Heavensward jobs. Now, you can stop booing me for that just because the community is against it right now. They could do it. They just have to put actual thoughts into how they get the jobs into raids without excluding specific jobs from raids, because they give jobs either multiple of the same buffs or multiple of the same debuffs, but one of those jobs is just objectively good in its role, while another job is objectively bad in its role. Something you need to understand at the outset of this is that it isn't acceptable that jobs can just be objectively bad in their role. They should all have a place, but they don't want to go back to that because I guess they don't think that they can balance it. But they should be able to. If they have to take extra time, if they have to release expansions where they don't give us 2 fucking jobs, because there's no reason to continue adding more jobs if I can't actually play them all on my character. There's no point. You can say that you think you can play them on your character, but you can't play them all in raids on your character. Therefore, I need 21 characters right now. But to fix the issue with jobs being excluded if they attempted to go back to the Heavensward style of jobs, they could try to figure out a way to have 2 similar buffs or debuffs that stack together without making it mandatory that you do that. The issue being that they could try and make it mandatory to clear DPS checks, but tell me how terrible it would be if certain PFs said something like double slashing debuff, bring slashing damage, or, double bludgeoning debuff, bring bludgeoning. Or if they just simply didn't have that because they were making a more casual group. Just something of that nature. Keeping the balance good enough that jobs and roles aren't excluded because they have a low top end or a low potential. I am 100% of the belief that they've gone too far in raising the skill floor while also lowering the skill ceiling. Buffs should have some misalignment in their timers. Jobs are supposed to feel like they bring something to a fight. If a job brings a short, lower percentage 1-minute raid buff, and you happen to have some jobs who have strong 2 minutes, but a decent 1 minute, then that 1 minute raid wide is a higher value in your group. Everything just being a 2-minute raid buff, with jobs having 1 or 2 buttons that they press that literally only exist to be pressed when they have their own personal 1-minute buff up, doesn't feel great. As somebody who came into this game maining Paladin at the time, I dislike that Goring Blade is just a 1-minute button now. I actually kind of liked constantly having my dot up on my target between my Goring Blade dot and the Requiescat combo dot when you got above level, I think it was just a level 90 thing at the time in Endwalker. But that and the more niche cases where there's multiple targets, so you go into Deep Dungeon on Paladin solo, I was attempting that, and you keep Goring Blade up on multiple targets at the same time, the other changes are okay, making it so you don't drop combo with literally any button press that isn't the next one in your combo. That's positive. But some of the changes that they're making, I don't understand why they're taking away dots so much. They've lowered the skill ceiling so much by taking away buttons and making it so you don't have to keep dots up. A good example of this oversimplification is the number of buttons that are on Viper and Summoner right now. But going back to where I think we should go, back towards Heavensward, I think their old version of combos, where you would drop it if you missed a positional, would be fine if we had more agency with where the boss was. But if it's just going to constantly teleport to center and face north every time it does a mechanic, where people have to keep moving around, the positionals don't matter as much as just getting your uptime. Part of the issue I see with positionals currently is there's no real consequence in missing them. Some people legitimately level melee jobs and don't realize that they have positional buffs. Not until they actually, like, go to deal with Stone Sea Sky, or whatever the order of those words are. When I was starting my raid group, I would ask people to make sure that they could actually take down the dummy in Stone Sea Sky before we actually went in for the raid bosses. It'd be like, go test your DPS. If you can't kill it, then you're doing something wrong with your rotation. And that was when a couple of new players that I had invited into my raid group discovered that Dragoon had its side and rear positionals. They realized that they weren't hitting the DPS check, and I asked them, are you hitting your positionals? Because over a 3-minute period, that's a decent amount of damage. It's not a ton. I think it's like, what, 40 to 60 potency? So every, like, few times you go through your, is it like an 8-part rotation? Every few times it's like pressing 1, maybe 2 extra buttons. But it adds up over the course of 3 minutes. And they go, oh, deals this much damage if at flank, but this much if not. And deals this much damage at rear, but this much if not. And the reason I believe this happens to people leveling up is because hitting positionals aren't required. You might get a buff. In fact, I don't even think you get a buff anymore. You used to have to do it to get your buffs back in Heavensward and Stormblood. But in trying to separate the floor from the ceiling, I think we have to do that. They've gotten so close that the floor and the ceiling have found a venue, gone into the back, and they're doing the mattress mambo. The biggest issue is just getting straight up time now, not with playing your job well. Always be casting is only a thing now, because pressing the wrong button on your GCD is better damage than delaying, even for a part of a second, because you got lost in your rotation, you got lost in the sauce because of how many buttons you have. And in attempting to go back to the style of Heavensward jobs, I need to reiterate that unique doesn't just mean bad in this case. It means that they would actually need to work on making things balanced. The reason that they don't work to keep things balanced is because they don't want to put the man-hours into researching how much changes will actually affect a job. They don't need more time. They need more people, and more skilled people, because frankly, I don't think that they appear to be working with very experienced developers, despite the age of the game that they're at this point. Just because there's a meta comp doesn't mean you should have to bring the meta. Test the fight with the jobs that you see as the literal worst set of jobs. Whatever jobs deal the least damage in each role, that comp should be able to clear with practice. The game testers have far more time to practice killing these fights, starting with a meta comp, and then as they get more experience with the fight, start moving to worse and worse jobs in that role. If they can't clear it with practice, then the fight probably needs to be tuned down slightly, so we aren't leaving jobs behind for no legitimate reason. But I say, bring back jobs, bringing something unique to the table. Not every job does the same thing, but with just a slightly different coat of paint on it. They have to know that their community has been complaining about the homogenization since they started it. And I don't get how people in the space can respond to them homogenizing the game further with, well, maybe you're playing the wrong game then. How about they listen to their community and correct course, instead of going into a direction that the community has said that they don't want and would likely hurt the dedicated fan base of the game in an attempt to make the game easier for newer players to get into. Eventually, those newer players become veteran players as well, and then they want something more engaging. And your new players already believe that combat starts too easily, too slowly. I have heard of multiple people quitting before they even get to like level 20 because of the 2.5 second global cooldown with no off globals, and they just sit there watching their character auto attack while they go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. They get so bored early on that they just want to leave. They want to play something that's more engaging. So they don't actually need to make the combat easier. It's already dumbed down to the point where people get bored of combat early on. What needs to happen is a quicker introduction to things like the off-globals, making sure that people understand that they get abilities that are affected by the direction of the enemy. I don't believe, or at the very least I don't recall, getting a tutorial on positionals when I started off as a pugilist. I was just pressing the buttons in the order the game told me that they worked in, back in Shadowbringers, and much later realized that, oh, it says it does marginally more damage if I attack from this position rather than this position. If it really isn't enough to make it a requirement to do it in raids, I think for early Savage, at the very least, it should be made into a requirement. Anyway, I guess I'd say that's my spicy take. My rant that I assume will cause people to want to come burn my house down while crying, "How dare you say that Square Enix, our Lord and Savior Yoshi P, he's wrong about where the game should go." Well, I do believe he and the team at Creative Business Unit 3, or wherever their name currently is, whatever they might change their name to, are wrong at the moment. And I'd prefer that they fix it before the game actually dies, due to people not doing the content they're putting out. It'll always have some people, in the same way that World of Warcraft or something like MapleStory will always have people who stick around for the social interactions with the people that they've met. But that can only tide you over for so long, before they decide to do something else as a friend group. Something that they all actually want to do, rather than just logging in to talk to each other. So, go ahead and tell me how wrong you think I am down in the comments. I really feel like we should have some discussions on where they're actually going and what they should do to keep things engaging. See you guys in the next video.